It was late evening when I stepped through the front door, weary but glad to be home after a weekend with my family. The house was unusually quiet, but there was an air of tension I couldn't quite place. I set my bag down and called out, "Laura, I'm home." From the living room, Laura appeared, her face alight with an energy that could only be described as smug satisfaction. Her arms were crossed, and there was a gleam in her eye that instantly put me on edge. "Welcome back," she said, her tone dripping with an unusual excitement. "How was the visit?" "Good," I replied cautiously. "What's going on? You look pleased with yourself." She leaned against the arm of the couch, her smile widening. "Oh, I've been busy while you were gone. Made a big move for us." Something about the way she emphasized big move made my stomach tighten. "What kind of move?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Laura straightened, clearly relishing the moment. "I sold your jewelry collection," she announced with a flourish. "All those pieces you've been hoarding in that cabinet? They're gone. And you won't believe how much I got for them." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, processing her words. She had sold it? My jewelry collection. A lifetime of heirlooms, personal acquisitions, and carefully preserved memories was gone? My chest tightened as a surge of anger rose, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to react emotionally. "You sold my collection?" I said slowly, each word deliberate. "Don't be so dramatic," she replied, waving a dismissive hand. "You never even wear those pieces. They were just collecting dust. And besides, I did it for us. The money's already being put to good use." "Good use?" I echoed, my voice tighter than I intended. Her smile widened. "I invested it in my business. This is the start of my empire, Ethan. You should be thanking me. You'll see. This is going to change everything for us." I stared at her, struggling to keep my composure. The arrogance in her voice, the utter lack of consideration for what that collection meant to me. It was infuriating. But as much as I wanted to yell, to demand answers, I knew better. Reacting now would only give her the satisfaction of feeling justified. "I see," I said carefully, my tone neutral. "And how much did you get for it?" Laura's grin turned triumphant. "A small fortune," she said, rattling off a figure that made my heart sink further. "You wouldn't believe the buyers I found. High-end consignment shops, private auctions, they ate it up." I nodded slowly, suppressing the urge to lash out. "Well," I said, forcing a tight smile, "I hope it was worth it." "Oh, it will be," she replied confidently, mistaking my calm for acceptance. "You'll thank me when this business takes off. Trust me." I offered a curt nod and excused myself, retreating to the privacy of my office. Once inside, I closed the door and leaned against it, the weight of what she had done crashing down on me. My collection wasn't just a random assortment of jewelry. It was a deeply personal part of my life. Some of the pieces were family heirlooms, passed down through generations. Others were treasures I had acquired over the years, each with its own story. And now they were gone, or so Laura thought. Because what Laura didn't know, what she had never cared to ask, was that most of the pieces in that cabinet were replicas. The genuine heirlooms, the truly valuable items, were securely stored in a vault, far from her reach. I had made that decision years ago, long before I ever suspected her of something like this. It was a precaution, a way to ensure the safety of what mattered most. Sitting at my desk, I opened the safe hidden behind a painting and retrieved the inventory list. One by one, I confirmed that the genuine items were still accounted for, tucked away in their secure location. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a simmering anger. Laura's arrogance and disregard for my feelings had reached a breaking point, and this time, I wouldn't let it slide. I placed the list back in the safe and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Laura thought she had outsmarted me, that she had taken control. But she was wrong. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The hours after Laura's revelation were a blur of suppressed anger and meticulous thought. Alone in my office, I paced the floor, replaying her words in my mind. She had been so smug, so sure of herself. The audacity to not only sell my jewelry collection, but to do so without even consulting me was galling. But anger wouldn't solve anything. If I had learned anything over the years, it was the value of patience. I sat at my desk and opened the inventory list I had tucked away in the safe. The faint scent of aged paper greeted me as I unfolded the meticulous records of my collection. Each item was logged with care, descriptions, dates of acquisition, and, most importantly, their locations. The genuine pieces were all accounted for, safely locked in the vault at the bank. The items Laura had sold? Replicas I had commissioned years ago for display purposes. It hadn't been an easy decision at the time. I remembered the uneasy feeling I had after a casual conversation with a colleague about the risks of keeping valuable heirlooms at home. The idea of something happening to those treasures, the pieces passed down through generations of my family, had been unbearable. So, I had taken precautions. The originals were placed in a secure vault, and I hired a master jeweler to create replicas so convincing that even I sometimes forgot they weren't real. Laura, of course, had never known the difference. She hadn't cared enough to ask. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smirk forming. The irony wasn't lost on me. Laura had gone to such lengths to rid herself of what she thought was a collection of immense value, only to sell counterfeits. She believed she had made a power move, funding her empire with treasures she saw as an untapped resource. In reality, she had been duped by her own greed. The question now was how to proceed. I could confront her immediately, but what would that accomplish? It would be satisfying in the moment, sure, but it wouldn't give her actions the weight they deserved. No, I needed a plan. Something measured, deliberate, and irrefutable. The first step was confirming where the replicas had gone. Laura had mentioned consignment shops and private auctions, and it wouldn't be difficult to trace the transactions. She was careless, often leaving trails in the form of receipts and messages. I knew her well enough to know she wouldn't have covered her tracks. Pulling my laptop closer, I began piecing together the puzzle. Laura's email was logged into the browser, her history revealing a series of visits to high-end auction sites and consignment boutiques. A few searches later, I found listings that matched descriptions of the pieces she had sold. My heart twisted as I clicked through the images, recognizing the familiar designs. Designs that were meant to stay in my family forever. Still, there was a certain grim satisfaction in knowing that the true treasures remained untouched. The replicas might have sentimental value in their own way, but they weren't irreplaceable. What mattered now was gathering the evidence I needed to expose her betrayal. Over the next few hours, I compiled a file. Screenshots of the listings, saved messages from Laura's email account, and a timeline of her activities based on the receipts I found in her desk drawer. It was astonishing how brazen she had been, as if the very idea of consequences had never crossed her mind. As I worked, I couldn't help but reflect on the deeper meaning of her actions. The jewelry collection wasn't just a financial asset. It was a symbol of my family's history, of the sacrifices and triumphs that had shaped us. Laura's willingness to discard it so thoughtlessly spoke volumes about how little she valued the things that mattered to me. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a fundamental disregard for who I was. By the time I finished my research, the anger I had felt earlier had given way to a cold determination. Laura thought she had the upper hand, but she had no idea what was coming. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make her understand the depth of her mistake. I locked the file away in a secure folder on my computer, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. This was no longer about revenge. It was about justice. Laura needed to face the consequences of her arrogance and deceit, and I would ensure that she did. The next morning, I greeted her with the same calm demeanor I always had, masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. She was radiant, practically glowing with self-satisfaction as she sipped her coffee and scrolled through her phone. "Morning," I said, my voice even. "Morning," she replied, barely looking up. "You seemed tense last night. I hope you're not upset about the collection. It was for the best, you know." I smiled faintly, hiding my true feelings. "Of course, Laura. I'm sure it was." She grinned, clearly pleased with my response. Little did she know, her empire was built on illusions, and the truth was about to come crashing down. This was only the beginning. Laura's smugness lingered in the air like a heavy fog, but I kept my demeanor composed. masking the quiet storm brewing inside me. Over the next several days, I began the painstaking process of piecing together the puzzle of her betrayal. It wasn't enough to know what she had done. I needed irrefutable proof to expose her actions when the time was right. I started with her receipts. Laura had never been one to care about details or covering her tracks, which worked to my advantage. A search through her desk drawers revealed a treasure trove of transaction records, handwritten notes, receipts from high-end consignment shops, and even a couple of invoices from private auction houses. Each slip of paper painted a clearer picture of her grand business move. The jewelry listings she had accessed online were easy to trace. Her email account, which she rarely bothered to log out of, provided a window into her communications with buyers and brokers. I saved copies of every correspondence, noting how she described the pieces with the kind of flair that suggested she truly believed she was offloading a fortune. Her words were full of arrogance, as if she were pulling off some brilliant masterstroke of ingenuity. One email caught my attention. It was addressed to a boutique auction house, where she had sold several pieces at what she described as a fair market value. The auction house even provided detailed descriptions of the items and their estimated worth, numbers that were laughably inflated, considering the items were replicas. I saved the email, knowing it would be a crucial piece of evidence. My next step was to visit the consignment shops she had mentioned in her communications. Disguised as a potential customer, I walked into one of the upscale boutiques she frequented. The shop was pristine, its displays gleaming under carefully arranged lighting. As I scanned the cases, I spotted one of my replicas, a necklace with intricate filigree work that mimicked an heirloom from my grandmother. It was priced at several $1,000s, a fraction of what the genuine piece was worth, but still enough to make me shake my head in disbelief. "Beautiful piece, isn't it?" the shop assistant said, noticing my interest. "It is," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "Do you know much about its provenance?" The assistant smiled knowingly, launching into a rehearsed spiel about the item's history, as described by Laura. It took everything I had to maintain my composure as she repeated Laura's lies, turning what should have been a cherished family story into a cheap sales pitch. I thanked the assistant and left the shop, feeling both vindicated and furious. The pattern repeated at every location I visited. Laura had spun an elaborate web of deceit, turning my family's history into a commodity to fund her selfish ambitions. Each discovery added to my growing file of evidence, strengthening my resolve to hold her accountable. Back at home, I compiled everything I had gathered: receipts, emails, auction records, and photos of the consigned jewelry. I organized it into a timeline, detailing every transaction and tracing the pieces from my collection to their current locations. The picture it painted was damning, a clear testament to Laura's arrogance and lack of integrity. As I worked, I couldn't help but reflect on the person I thought Laura was versus the person she had become. We had started our marriage with shared dreams and mutual respect, or so I had believed. Somewhere along the way, her ambition had turned into greed, and her charm had become manipulation. This betrayal wasn't just about the jewelry. It was a betrayal of trust, of the partnership I had once cherished. One evening, as I reviewed the evidence for the 100th time, I decided it was time to bring someone else into the fold. My friend Daniel had been a constant presence in my life, a voice of reason when I needed it most. If anyone could help me navigate the next steps, it was him. Over drinks at a quiet bar, I laid everything out for Daniel: the jewelry, the receipts, the emails, and the replicas still safely stored in my vault. He listened intently, his expression shifting from disbelief to quiet anger as I recounted the details. "Ethan," he said finally, "this is unbelievable. She really thought she could get away with this?" "She did," I replied, sipping my drink. "She still does. But she doesn't know about the replicas or the vault. As far as she's concerned, she sold my family's legacy and got away with it." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "What's your plan?" "I'm going to let her dig her own grave," I said. "She's already so confident, so sure of herself. The more time I give her, the more arrogant she'll become. And when the time is right, I'll confront her with everything." Daniel leaned back, a small smile playing on his lips. "You've always been a patient man, Ethan. But this? This is next level. It's not about revenge, I said, though part of me wasn't so sure. It's about accountability. She needs to face the consequences of what she's done. Daniel raised his glass. To accountability, then, and to making sure she gets exactly what she deserves. As we clinked glasses, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was clear, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. Laura might think she was winning, but her empire was built on lies. And soon, those lies would come crashing down. The evidence I'd gathered felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time since Laura's betrayal, I felt like I was on solid ground, no longer stumbling in the dark. But as clear as the path forward was, it wasn't one I wanted to walk alone. I needed someone I could trust, someone who would help me navigate the storm brewing just ahead. That someone was Daniel. Daniel and I had been friends for over a decade, the kind of friend who was always there when you needed him most. He was steady, practical, and fiercely loyal. Exactly the kind of person I could confide in without hesitation. That evening, I invited him over to my place under the guise of catching up, though the weight in my tone must have given away that this wasn't just a casual hangout. "Ethan," Daniel greeted as he stepped through the door. "You sounded preoccupied on the phone. What's going on?" I offered him a drink and led him into the living room, where my laptop and stacks of papers sat waiting on the coffee table. He eyed them curiously but didn't press, knowing I'd get to the point when I was ready. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind of comfortable quiet that only exists between old friends. Finally, I took a deep breath and began. "It's Laura," I said, my voice steady but heavy. "She sold my jewelry collection." Daniel's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Wait, the collection? The heirlooms? Ethan, are you serious?" "Dead serious," I replied, handing him a folder with copies of the receipts and emails I'd uncovered. She sold everything she could get her hands on while I was away. Claimed she was funding her business empire. Daniel flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with each new piece of evidence. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "She didn't even ask? Didn't think to consult you first?" "She didn't see the need," I said bitterly. "To her, it was just sitting there, collecting dust. She figured she could do something useful with it." He shook his head, setting the folder down. "And you're just now telling me this? Ethan, why didn't you call me the second you found out?" "Because I needed to be sure of my next steps," I said. "I've been gathering evidence, tracing where the pieces went, building a case. And there's something she doesn't know." I leaned forward, my voice dropping slightly. "The pieces she sold? Most of them were replicas." Daniel froze, his eyes narrowing. "Replicas?" I nodded. "Years ago, I had duplicates made of the more valuable pieces. The real ones are in a vault at the bank. What she sold were convincing fakes. Worth something, sure, but nothing close to what she thought." Daniel let out a low whistle, leaning back against the couch. "Ethan, that's brilliant. She thinks she's sitting on a fortune, doesn't she?" "She does," I confirmed. "But her so-called empire is built on illusions. And when the truth comes out, it's all going to collapse." For the next hour, I laid everything out for Daniel. The emails, the auction listings, the receipts, and the timeline of Laura's betrayal. He listened intently, asking sharp questions and offering insights that hadn't occurred to me. By the time I finished, we had sketched out a plan. One that would expose Laura's actions in a way that left no room for excuses or deflections. "You need to play this smart," Daniel said, his tone serious. "She's arrogant, and that arrogance is going to be her downfall. But you can't let her see this coming. Let her dig herself deeper. The more confident she feels, the harder she'll fall." "I know," I said, nodding. "That's why I've been keeping quiet. She thinks she's won. The last thing I want to do is tip her off." Daniel leaned forward, his expression firm. "And you need to protect yourself, Ethan. Legally, financially. If she's willing to pull something like this, who knows what else she might try. Talk to a lawyer. Make sure your assets are secure." "That's the next step," I agreed. "I've already started looking into it." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. And Ethan? Don't let this consume you. It's easy to get caught up in the anger, but don't let her take more from you than she already has." I met his gaze, the sincerity in his words striking a chord. "Thanks, Daniel, for everything. Always," he said simply. "You're not in this alone." As Daniel left that evening, I felt a renewed sense of determination. With his support and the growing body of evidence in my corner, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next. Laura might have thought she was untouchable, but she had underestimated me, and that was her greatest mistake. Laura's confidence was almost comical to watch. With every passing day, she paraded her new accomplishments like trophies, blissfully unaware of the web of evidence I was weaving around her. She had no idea how meticulously I was tracking her every move, documenting her lies and deceit with the patience of a man who had finally learned the power of quiet observation. She spent hours on calls, boasting about her business empire and the progress she was making. Every conversation, every boastful remark, only solidified my resolve. She thought she was untouchable, and that arrogance was going to make the truth hit her even harder. One evening, while Laura was out, I dove deeper into the details of her transactions. Her email account, which she still left logged in on her tablet, was a goldmine of information. I sifted through correspondence with auction houses, consignment shops, and private buyers. Each email added another layer to the growing file of evidence. I saved everything: screenshots of listings, conversations about appraisals, and invoices for the items she had sold. But it wasn't just emails. Laura had a habit of keeping physical records, likely because she thought it made her look professional. Her office desk drawers were filled with notebooks and receipts, all neatly organized. As I flipped through them, I couldn't help but shake my head at how brazen she had been. There were even notes about the potential profits she expected from her investments, complete with projections that would have been laughable if the situation weren't so infuriating. One particular receipt caught my attention. It was from a high-end auction house downtown, detailing the sale of a necklace that had been in my family for generations. The replica, of course. The description included an inflated estimate of its worth, likely based on Laura's embellished backstory. The idea of her spinning my family's history into a sales pitch made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for emotion. By the time I finished sorting through everything, the file I had compiled was massive. It included emails with buyers and auction houses detailing the sales of the jewelry, photographs of the listed pieces, many of which I had tracked down at various consignment shops, receipts and invoices that proved how much she had profited from the sales, screenshots of her social media posts boasting about her newfound wealth and success. The evidence was damning, and I knew it was more than enough to expose her. But I also knew I couldn't rush this. Laura's arrogance was still growing, and the longer I waited, the more reckless she would become. Every misstep she made would only strengthen my case. As I continued to gather information, I kept Daniel updated. His insights were invaluable, especially when it came to understanding the legal implications of Laura's actions. "Ethan, you've got her," he said during one of our late-night calls. "But you've got to play this smart. Don't confront her until you're absolutely ready. Let her hang herself with her own rope." "I know," I replied. "I'm not rushing this. I want her to feel like she's on top of the world before I bring her back down to reality." He chuckled. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." As the days turned into weeks, Laura continued her charade, oblivious to the storm brewing behind the scenes. She hosted a small gathering at the house one evening, inviting a handful of her friends to celebrate her success. I played the part of the supportive husband, offering polite smiles and making small talk while internally cataloging every boastful remark she made. "You've really outdone yourself, Laura," one of her friends gushed. "I can't believe how quickly your business is growing. What's your secret?" Laura's smile widened, her eyes sparkling with self-satisfaction. "It's all about taking risks," she said, glancing in my direction. "Sometimes you have to make bold moves to get ahead." I nodded, raising my glass in a mock toast. "Here's to bold moves," I said, the double meaning not lost on me. As the night wore on and the guests filtered out, Laura looked at me with that same smug expression she had worn since this all began. "See," she said, "I told you this would pay off. You should be proud of me, Ethan." I smiled faintly, suppressing the urge to laugh. "Oh, I am," I said. You've really outdone yourself, Laura. She didn't catch the edge in my tone, too wrapped up in her own delusions to notice. As she headed upstairs, I lingered in the living room, staring at the remnants of the evening. The evidence was all there, the pieces falling perfectly into place. Laura thought she was untouchable, but she had no idea how close she was to losing everything. The day I decided to confront Laura, the air felt heavier, charged with the weight of inevitability. Everything was in place. The file of evidence, the timeline of her actions, and the receipts that spoke volumes about her arrogance and deceit. I had rehearsed the conversation a dozen times in my head, carefully crafting my words to ensure there would be no room for her to manipulate the narrative. Today, the truth would finally come out. Laura was in the living room when I walked in, her laptop perched on her knees as she scrolled through what I could only assume were more overpriced purchases or business investments. She looked up briefly, offering a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her demeanor had grown colder in recent weeks, likely because she felt she no longer needed to impress me. "Hey, Ethan," she said absently. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, grounding myself. "We need to talk." Her fingers paused over the keyboard, and she tilted her head, curious but unconcerned. "About what?" I gestured to the chair across from her. "Can you put that down for a minute? This is important." Sensing the seriousness in my tone, she set the laptop aside and crossed her arms. "Okay, I'm listening." I sat down, placing the folder of evidence on the table between us. "This," I said, tapping the folder, "is everything you've been up to over the past few months." Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder, pulling out the first few pages. Receipts from the consignment shops, emails with auction houses, and screenshots of her online transactions. I laid them out on the table, one by one, watching her expression shift from curiosity to shock. "These," I said, "are the records of every piece of jewelry you sold, every email you sent, every receipt you received. It's all here, Laura." Her eyes darted to the papers, then back to me. "I don't understand. Why are you showing me this?" "Because," I said, my voice calm but firm, "it's time you understand the consequences of your actions. You sold what you thought were valuable family heirlooms without even consulting me. You lied, manipulated, and flaunted your so-called success as if it came from hard work. But it didn't, Laura. It came from theft." She bristled, her initial shock giving way to defensiveness. "Theft? Are you serious? That jewelry was just sitting there, collecting dust. I did something useful with it. I invested in our future." "Our future?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean your future? You didn't do this for us, Laura. You did it for yourself. And the worst part? You didn't even know what you were selling." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "The pieces you sold? Most of them were replicas. Fakes. The real heirlooms are safe and secure, locked away in a vault where you could never touch them." The color drained from her face. "Replicas?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "That's right. All those buyers you duped? They paid thousands for pieces that aren't worth a fraction of what they thought. And you? You built your so-called empire on a foundation of lies." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find the right words. Finally, she said, You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke?" I pulled out the final piece of evidence, a detailed inventory list of the real heirlooms, complete with photographs and storage receipts. I placed it in front of her, letting the truth sink in. "This isn't a joke, Laura," I said quietly. "This is reality. You sold fakes, thinking you were outsmarting me. But the only person you fooled was yourself." For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of her shallow breathing. Then, she erupted. "You set me up," she yelled, standing abruptly. "You let me sell those pieces knowing they were fake? How could you do that to me?" I stayed seated, my gaze steady. "How could I do that to you? How could you do this to me, Laura? To my family? You didn't care about the meaning behind those pieces, the history they carried. You only cared about what they could get you. And now, you have to face the consequences of your greed." She sank back into her seat, her anger giving way to something resembling despair. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "I made a mistake. I didn't mean to." "Stop," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you're going to deal with the fallout. Because this isn't just between us anymore. The buyers, the auction houses, they're going to want answers. And when they come knocking, I won't be the one they're looking for." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. But there was no satisfaction in it, no sense of triumph. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about standing up for the things that mattered to me. I stood, gathering the papers and returning them to the folder. "Consider this your wake-up call, Laura. Your actions have consequences, and it's time you start taking responsibility for them." Without waiting for a response, I turned and left the room, leaving her to sit alone with the weight of the truth. It was done. The confrontation I had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure was over, and as I walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. The lies were finally out in the open, and the path forward was clearer than ever. The fallout from the confrontation was swift and unrelenting. Laura, once smug and confident, now moved through the house like a shadow of her former self. The truth had hit her harder than even I anticipated. She avoided me whenever possible, the weight of her actions visibly etched into her every movement. But avoidance wasn't enough to escape what was coming. The buyers she had duped began to reach out, their inquiries escalating into demands for answers. Emails, phone calls, even a couple of in-person visits. They all wanted to know how they had ended up paying exorbitant prices for what they now suspected were fakes. Laura's facade of control crumbled further with each interaction. One evening, as I reviewed some work in my office, I heard her voice rise from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone a mix of desperation and defensiveness. I didn't know they weren't genuine," she stammered. "I was told they were authentic. Look, I'm trying to resolve this." I couldn't help but feel a pang of grim satisfaction. This was the bed she had made, and now she was being forced to lie in it. But there was no room for gloating. The fallout was affecting more than just her reputation. It was my life, my name, and my family's legacy that she had recklessly dragged through the mud. The legal side of things soon followed. The buyers who had purchased the jewelry weren't content with just apologies. They wanted compensation, and some even hinted at lawsuits. Laura, who had always prided herself on her quick thinking and charm, was suddenly scrambling to keep up with the mounting pressure. I had prepared for this. Samantha, my lawyer, had already been briefed on the situation, and she guided me through every step to ensure my assets remained protected. We worked to separate my name from Laura's actions, making it clear that her choices had been made without my consent or knowledge. The evidence I had gathered became a shield, protecting me from the legal crossfire. One afternoon, as I sat in Samantha's office reviewing documents, she looked up from her desk with a rare smile. "You've done everything right, Ethan. The buyers have a case against Laura, but none of it traces back to you. You're in the clear." The relief that washed over me was indescribable. For months, I had carried the weight of her betrayal, fearing that it might cost me more than just my peace of mind. Now, I could finally see a path forward, free from the shadows of her actions. Laura, on the other hand, was not so fortunate. Her so-called empire began to crumble under the weight of its own deceit. The investments she had made with the money from the jewelry sales were shaky at best, and without the confidence of her buyers and partners, they quickly fell apart. One by one, the ventures she had so proudly boasted about dissolved, leaving her with nothing but debts and regret. One evening, she approached me in the kitchen, her eyes red and puffy from crying. It was the first time in weeks that she had spoken to me directly. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do. They're all demanding refunds, and I don't have the money. I need help." I set down the cup of tea I had been holding and met her gaze. "Help," I said, my tone even. "Laura, you didn't think to ask for my help before you sold the collection. You didn't ask for my input or my consent. You didn't care about what this would do to me, to my family's legacy. So tell me, why should I help you now?" She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, but I didn't think it would. I didn't think it would get this bad. I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. Laura, I warned you that your actions had consequences. And now, you're facing them. I can't fix this for you. You have to take responsibility for what you've done. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then, she simply nodded and walked away, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. As the weeks passed, the fallout continued. Laura's reputation was in shambles, her relationships with friends and business associates strained to the breaking point. She tried to rebuild, to salvage what little she could, but the damage was too great. The woman who had once prided herself on being invincible was now a shadow of her former self. And me? I focused on moving forward. The legal battles were behind me, and my name was cleared. With Samantha's help, I finalized the paperwork to separate our finances completely, ensuring that Laura's mistakes could never again touch what I had worked so hard to protect. The fallout from her betrayal was painful, yes, but it also brought clarity. It showed me the kind of person Laura truly was, and it reminded me of my own strength. I had weathered the storm, and now I was ready to rebuild. Not just my life, but myself. With the legal storm behind me and Laura's empire reduced to ashes, I finally had the space to focus on reclaiming control over my life. It wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. It was about regaining the sense of stability and purpose that Laura's betrayal had threatened to destroy. The first step was meeting with Samantha to finalize the divorce proceedings. Sitting across from her in the conference room, I reviewed the paperwork that would legally sever the ties that had once bound me to Laura. It was a bittersweet moment, knowing that what had started as a promising partnership had ended in such betrayal. But as I signed each page, I felt a sense of closure washing over me. This was the final act in a chapter of my life that I was ready to leave behind. Ethan, Samantha said, breaking my thoughts, this agreement not only protects your assets, but also ensures that Laura has no legal claim to anything related to your family's estate. You've handled this with remarkable grace. I nodded, offering a small smile. Thank you, Samantha. I couldn't have done this without your guidance. Leaving her office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of Laura's actions no longer loomed over me, and for the first time, I could truly envision a future unburdened by her deceit. Back at home, I began to make changes. The house, once a shared space, now felt like it needed to reflect who I was. I removed the remnants of Laura's influence, donating the decorations and furniture she had chosen. In their place, I added pieces that felt more personal, bookshelves filled with novels I loved, art that resonated with me, and furniture that was as comfortable as it was functional. Each change, though small, felt like reclaiming a part of myself. The jewelry collection, safely stored in the bank vault, became a symbol of resilience. I visited the vault one afternoon, carefully inspecting each piece. The heirlooms were more than just objects. They were pieces of my family's history, reminders of the values and sacrifices that had shaped us. As I held each item, I felt a renewed sense of connection to my roots, a reminder of the strength that had carried me through this ordeal. Outside of my personal life, I focused on my career with renewed energy. Projects that had once felt like obligations now became opportunities to challenge myself and grow. My colleagues noticed the shift, commenting on my focus and determination. One of them, a mentor who had always supported me, pulled me aside during a meeting. Ethan, I don't know what's changed, but whatever it is, keep doing it, he said with a smile. You're thriving. His words meant more than he knew. Thriving wasn't just about professional success. It was about reclaiming the joy and purpose that Laura's betrayal had temporarily stolen from me. I also reconnected with friends and family, the people who had stood by me through the storm. Dinners, phone calls, and casual get-togethers became regular occurrences, filling my days with laughter and warmth. These moments reminded me of what truly mattered, the relationships built on trust and mutual respect. One evening, as I sat in my newly redecorated living room, I found myself reflecting on the journey I had taken. The pain of Laura's betrayal had been overwhelming, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons. I had learned to trust my instincts, to prioritize my well-being, and to never underestimate the strength that comes from enduring hardship. Laura, meanwhile, had faded into the background of my life. The occasional update about her struggles reached me through mutual acquaintances, but I no longer felt anger or bitterness. If anything, I felt pity. Her downfall was a result of her own choices, and while I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing justice served, I had no desire to dwell on her misfortune. My focus was on the future, on the life I was building for myself. As the months passed, I began to explore new opportunities and passions. I took up photography, a hobby I had always been curious about but never pursued. The act of capturing moments through a lens became a form of therapy, a way to see the beauty in the world around me. I also started volunteering at a local community center, finding fulfillment in helping others rebuild their lives. Reclaiming control wasn't just about undoing the damage Laura had caused. It was about creating a life that was authentically mine. Each step forward was a reminder that I was capable of overcoming anything, that the strength I had discovered during this ordeal would carry me through whatever challenges lay ahead. One crisp autumn morning, as I stood on my porch sipping coffee and watching the leaves fall, I felt a profound sense of peace. The chaos of the past was behind me, and the future stretched out before me, filled with possibility. I had reclaimed control, not just of my life, but of my happiness. The finality of the divorce was a quiet relief. With Laura officially out of my life, I was free to focus on moving forward without the weight of her betrayal hanging over me. It was time to rebuild not just my surroundings but my sense of self. Rediscovering the man I had been before her deceit turned my world upside down. The house, once a battleground of unspoken tensions, became my sanctuary. Every room was a reflection of my journey back to myself. The furniture, art, and decor were chosen with care, each piece symbolizing a step away from the past. The living room, with its warm lighting and shelves filled with books I loved, became a space for quiet reflection. The kitchen, now a bright and inviting place, encouraged me to experiment with cooking, something I had always enjoyed but rarely indulged in during my marriage. My friends and family played a crucial role in this transition. They had been my anchors during the storm, and now they were my cheerleaders as I moved forward. Weekend hikes with my brother, late-night conversations with my sister, and Sunday dinners with my parents reminded me of the support system I had taken for granted. Each interaction was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that my life was still rich with meaningful connections. Professionally, I threw myself into my work with a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges that once felt overwhelming now invigorated me. I tackled projects with a determination that didn't go unnoticed. My colleagues, who had witnessed my struggles from afar, were quick to acknowledge the shift in my demeanor. Their encouragement fueled my momentum, pushing me to achieve milestones I hadn't thought possible. One particularly rewarding moment came when I was invited to speak at a conference. The topic was resilience, a subject I had come to understand intimately. Standing on that stage, sharing my journey with an audience of strangers, was both cathartic and empowering. I spoke about the lessons I had learned, the strength I had found in adversity, and the importance of reclaiming control over one's life. The applause at the end wasn't just for my words. It was a testament to the power of moving forward. As I rebuilt my life, I allowed myself to explore new passions. Photography became an unexpected source of joy. There was something profoundly therapeutic about capturing the world through a lens, finding beauty in the mundane and the extraordinary. Each photograph was a reminder to focus on the present, to appreciate the fleeting moments that make life meaningful. Travel also became a way to reconnect with myself. I visited places I had always dreamed of, a serene mountain retreat, a bustling city known for its vibrant culture, and a quiet coastal town where the sound of the waves seemed to wash away the remnants of the past. Each trip was a step further from the shadow of my marriage, a chance to embrace the freedom I had earned. Meanwhile, Laura's presence in my life faded into the background. Mutual friends occasionally mentioned her struggles, but I made it clear I wasn't interested in updates. My focus was on my future, not her mistakes. The jewelry collection, safely stored in the bank vault, stood as a quiet reminder of the resilience and foresight that had carried me through the chaos. One evening, as I sorted through some old photographs, I came across an image of myself from years ago. I was smiling, carefree, and full of optimism. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for the time I had lost. But then I looked around at the life I had rebuilt and realized that I hadn't lost anything at all. I had grown. I had endured. And I had come out stronger on the other side. Moving on wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about embracing the present and looking forward to the future. It was about rediscovering joy, cultivating gratitude, and finding purpose in the simplest of things. As I stood on my porch that night, the cool breeze carrying the scent of autumn, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey wasn't over. It never truly is. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. I had moved on, not just from Laura but from the pain and doubt that had once defined me. And in doing so, I had rediscovered the best parts of myself. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows, casting warm, golden hues across the room. My home, once a battleground of unspoken tensions and lingering betrayal, now felt like a haven. The divorce was finalized, the ties to Laura officially severed, and with it came a profound sense of freedom. Freedom to chart my own course, unburdened by the shadows of the past. For the first time in years, my days felt entirely my own. The house, now fully redecorated to reflect my tastes and personality, stood as a symbol of my new beginning. The sterile decor Laura had insisted on was gone, replaced by warm tones, comfortable furniture, and shelves filled with books and photos that told my story. It felt like I had reclaimed not just my space, but my identity. One morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, a wave of gratitude washed over me. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought me to this moment, a moment where I felt whole again. The scars of betrayal and heartbreak were still there, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they were reminders of how far I had come and the strength I had found within myself. My professional life had flourished in the aftermath of the divorce. The clarity and focus I gained allowed me to excel in ways I hadn't anticipated. Projects that once felt like obligations became opportunities for growth and achievement. My colleagues and superiors took notice, and I found myself being offered roles that challenged me and pushed me to new heights. I accepted each one with enthusiasm, eager to continue building a career I could be proud of. Beyond work, I found joy in exploring passions I had long neglected. Photography, for instance, became a source of solace and inspiration. Capturing the world through a lens allowed me to see beauty in the smallest details, the way sunlight danced on water, the vibrant colors of a bustling market, or the quiet serenity of a forest path. Each photograph was a celebration of the present, a reminder that life was filled with moments worth cherishing. Travel became another avenue for rediscovery. I ventured to places I had always dreamed of visiting, but had put off for one reason or another. A tranquil mountain retreat, a lively coastal town, and even a historic European city became backdrops to my journey of renewal. With each trip, I felt a deeper connection to the world and to myself. Through it all, the jewelry collection remained safely tucked away in its vault. Its value was no longer tied solely to its monetary worth. It had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the foresight that had shielded me from the worst of Laura's betrayal. Occasionally, I would visit the vault, running my fingers over the pieces and reflecting on the journey they had endured alongside me. One evening, as I walked through a park near my home, I found myself reflecting on the lessons I had learned. The betrayal had been painful, yes, but it had also been a catalyst for growth. It had forced me to confront the parts of myself I had neglected, to rediscover my own strength, and to rebuild a life that was authentically mine. In a strange way, I was grateful for the experience, not for the pain it caused, but for the person it had helped me become. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I made a quiet vow to myself. This new chapter wasn't just about moving on. It was about thriving. It was about embracing the possibilities that lay ahead and living a life that honored the resilience and wisdom I had gained. Laura's chapter in my life was closed, but it wasn't erased. It was a part of my story, a reminder of what I had overcome. And as I looked toward the future, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength and clarity to face it head-on. This was my new beginning, and I intended to make the most of it.